Hi all, I would like to show you now how to give checkmate with knight and bishop against king. This is an endgame that it doesn't appear very often on the board, but it is very interesting to understand how to do this. This is a method that I'm going to teach you that is very structured, so it's easy to remember. If we look at the position on the board, we see that we have a light squared bishop, so we need to get the black king in one of these two light square corners. To do this, we will use the triangles methods. The triangles method is based on three triangles. This one we call the big triangle, and this we call the middle triangle, and this the small triangle. Now the first thing to do is we try to get the black king into this big triangle. Once we have done that, we'll repeat the procedure to get him into the middle triangle and then into the small triangle, and then we'll checkmate him. I'll show you an example to make clear how this works. The first thing that we need to do is to get the black king out of this dark square corner. To do this, we have to give a check with the knight on f7. So the first thing that we do is we bring the knight to f3. The black king will try to stay on the corner, but after we give a check on f7, it has to leave this h8 square. Now the next step is to put our pieces on the right place. The bishop has to be on the diagonal of the big triangle. You see, here is the big triangle, and the bishop we put on this diagonal. King goes to f8, the only way, and now the ideal squares for the light pieces are, for the bishop, it's always a place on the diagonal of the triangle, and then one square from the end of this diagonal. So in this case, the square b3. And the ideal square for the knight is always on the same rank or line as the bishop, but then with one square in between. So in this case, d3. If the bishop is on b3, we have to have our knight on d3. So we bring the bishop to b3, ideal square, and then we bring the knight to d3. And here you see why this is the ideal square for the knight and for the bishop. Because we form a wall. You see, the bishop takes care of these light squares, and the knight takes care of these dark squares. So the king, the black king, is not trapped in this big triangle. The king, the white king, will have to work from this side of the board, this side of the triangle, and the light pieces will take care of this side. Now our next step is to try to get the black king into the middle triangle. We have to push him there, and for that we have to use our king. But first, the black king will try to stay on this corner, so we need the white king to prevent him from escaping. If the king goes to e8, now first we have to wait one tempo, bishop c4, and if the king's come back, then with the bishop we take away e8. So now he has to move to the left. King d6. The method now is that with the white king we try to take away the square where the king came from, the black king, in this case e7. We can do this in two ways, by moving the king to f6 or to f8. The correct way is to f8, because the white king will work from this side of the triangle and the light pieces will work from this side. So we play king to f8, king d7, the bishop is brought to the ideal square, and now if the king goes to d6, the same method, with white king we take away the square where the black king came from. And now the king goes to c7, he has entered the middle triangle. So we have to keep him there. to keep him there, we use first the king to take away the square where he came from, so he cannot escape there. If he tries to go to this side, we bring the bishop now on this diagonal of the new triangle, the middle triangle. So later we will have to put our bishop on one of the ideal squares of this new triangle. Now can you name what the ideal square will be then? Remember, it's always on the diagonal of the triangle and then one square from the end. So in this case it could be d7 or b5. Those two squares are the ideal squares for the bishop. Now the king has gone to a5, attacking our bishop, so we cannot use the b5 square as ideal square, so we use the other one. Now the ideal square for the knight, same idea as before, we put the knight on the same rank or line as the bishop, but then with one square in between, so in this case on d5. King goes to b6, the king takes away c7, king goes to a5 again. Now we cannot move yet our knight to the ideal square because our knight is needed to prevent him from escaping from here. So we bring the king closer, and now that the king goes to a6, we have time to bring our knight to the ideal square. Knight to f4, and then the knight to d5, and we see now the new wall that we have formed, the new cage where the black king is trapped. What we want to do now is we want to bring our king now to the other side. Why? Because we have placed our light pieces on this side now, so we need the white king to work from the other side. Remember, it's just a rule. If the light pieces work from one side of the triangle, the king must work from the other side. That's the best way to work together. So king d6, and we have all the time of the world because the black king cannot escape out of this cage. So we'll bring it here, taking away the square where the black king came from, a5. If he goes to b7 now, we again take away the square where the black king comes from. It comes from a6, so we take away a6. Now he goes to a7, he has to go into this smallest triangle. So we are almost there. We have to again put the bishop on the diagonal of this triangle. Now the bishop is attacked, so we have to save it by putting it on a6. Now of course it would be strange to say that we have to put the bishop on b7 because that would be the ideal square. Now, but it is in the last position, b7 is the ideal square. So the same rule still counts, that the ideal square for the bishop is on the diagonal, one square from the end. But we cannot do that right now because it would be taken. So king a7. Now the next step for preparing the mating pattern, we have to put now the knight on the same line or rank as the bishop. We put it here. Now we are preparing the checkmate. We prepare the checkmate because now later the knight can go to d7, where it will give a check to the king on b8. Let me show you. King goes to b8. First, with the king we take away the square where he came from, a7, so now he has only two squares to play, b8 and a8. King to a8. Now we'll bring the bishop to b7, the ideal square, giving check. The king goes to b8, and the last move, knight d7, checkmate. Okay, so now maybe if this is the first time that you have watched this, it's needed to watch this video a few times, so you really understand the system of the three triangles and how the pieces work together. The ideal squares for the bishop and the knight, and the king working always from the other side of the triangle, taking away the squares where the black king came from. That's actually the method. Watch the video a few times if you want, and then practice this with a friend or against the computer, and you will really master this system, because it's not difficult to understand. It just needs some practice. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you next time.